and say good evening and welcome. Thank you for being very patient. Appreciate it. My name is George Gray. I'm the president of the Medfield Historical Society, and I want to say thank you for coming this evening to our first program of the fall season. I would also like to offer a special welcome to Cindy and Chuck, two members of the Allen family, who are visiting Medfield today from Illinois for the first time. So they're doing some genealogy work on their roots. So I think they've had a pretty interesting day. Before I introduce our guest speaker, Ken Hamilton, this evening, I just have a few comments. Our next meeting will be on Monday, November 2nd, beginning at 7:30 at the Unitarian Church on North Street, and the subject will be the Medfield Grange. Our speaker that evening will be a member, Linda Morse from Millis, and she just finished her master's thesis on the Medfield Grange, so she's quite expert on this subject. If anybody in the audience would like more information about the Society, we have copies of our latest bulletin that just went out the week before Medfield Day, and we also have some membership cards. We have a website also, medfieldhistoricalsociety.org, so if you want information about our activities, feel free to check the website. Usually at this point in the meeting, I would introduce Richard DeSorga, who would come up here and tell you about our speaker. But as many of you know, Richard is in China for 6 weeks on a teacher exchange program. He does have a blog address, www.desorga.blogspot.com. If anybody's interested, you can check it out and see what he's up to in China. I looked in Tilden's History of Medfield today for the year 1755, and the author mentions that Medfield provided its quota of men for the French and Indian Wars. It is interesting to note in his comment about this subject that Medfield's Lemuel Boyden submitted a petition to the court in Boston for the sum of £8 for his 9 weeks of hospitalization after returning from the Crown Point expedition. As you can see, health insurance, health care was an issue 254 years ago, just as it is today. Our speaker tonight is Ken Hamilton, who has driven from Maine, I'm sure he has lots of experiences now on 128, to speak to us on the King Philip War and the French and Indian War. I met Ken this past March at the Peak House, where he was an actor in the shooting of a movie. Whereas the first burning of the Peak House by Native Americans took place in 1675, the almost second burning took place this past March. I was standing outside the house when smoke began pouring out of the house. I was about to call 911 as my heart was beating very fast when someone told me that the movie crew was practicing with their smoke machine. Needless to say, I was relieved to learn that the house was not on fire. Please, not on my watch. Ken told me that he grew up in a military, museum, antique collecting, and art family, and he worked as a teenager in his father's blacksmith shop. He served with the 10th British Regiment of Foot in 1976 during the bicentennial. I marched with the Reading Minutemen during the same time period, and I remember how sharp an outfit the 10th Regiment was. Ken combined his history and anthropology education and his blacksmithing skills into a business, making colonial, frontier reproductions. While living in Maine, Ken developed a fondness for northern New England history of Indians and thus a love of French and Indian connections. He has read enormous volumes of this history, analyzed numerous archaeological reports of native life, and searched many collections of relevant material. Please welcome Ken Hamilton to Medfield.
Can everybody hear me if I just stand here?
Yes.
Okay, and that you could see how I'm dressed and I'll be able to use some of the objects here, and you'll be able to examine them after. As George said, my name is Ken Hamilton. I got about that much Indian heritage in my family somewhere, and we don't even know where. Out of Michigan, and my mother's family were loyalists and went to Ontario during the Revolutionary War. That's kind of my odd angle on all U.S. history, is that I'm not, not particularly drawn into one or the other. And so when I started getting into the native stuff, it was pretty evident that it was really spread out. Somebody might have, the gun lock that shot King Philip down in Taunton. Someone might have a wampum belt in Peabody, Harvard. What was all that stuff? Well, try and get it together so that you can actually feel, as we say, right, George? As a living history interpreter, try and get all that together. You need to know leatherwork. You need to know coat fashions. This is a typical King Philip's War, which is 1676 style coat. It looks like it's been shrunk in the wash, but that's the way the sleeves were. The gun parts. Some of the guns weren't even available. Proper exact reproductions were not even available during the early start of our my friends and I trying to embark on this study. So over time, we combined all the colonial stuff we could find here with, as George said, with the native stuff, dancing at powwows, and then just doing it. You just got to get out there and do it. It's part of the story. It's part of the discovery of what we're trying to find out about the time period and the people and the culture, which is really what it's all about. It'd be like a British soldier not knowing his drill if I didn't know anything about native culture, even if I had the best outfit in the world. So it's really important there's a formula, to use the formula. One is to, as I said, to study hard your European technology, fashions, customs, and culture, and just general history. You gotta do all that. You also need to, one needs to study the archaeological reports, of which there are numerous archaeological reports of both burials, which is very touchy subject for native people. But if the bulldozer is going to rip all that stuff up, they got to figure out who it's from. So the archaeologist goes in there and they excavate. So we have a number of historic sites that we glean that information from. The type, what kind of buttons did they actually wear? The fact that you find buttons tells you that there's coats there, especially if they're found, careful archaeology, in a row that implies that there was a coat. Even the gold braid, which I don't have on, this is not my French coat. I have gold braid, like an officer's uniform, on all the seams. And that has been found, as they say, in situ, which means it's, as they excavate these things, they see that this was a chief's coat. This is a type of a coat here that we see from the John Pynchon papers from this very time period, from the 1670s. But we also have to study museum collections around the world. There are, believe it or not, moccasin collections, pouch collections with the porcupine quill work on them, and sashes, and war clubs, and wampum belts, and just about everything you could imagine, collected mostly the best by European officers that were stationed here in North America. So you have to, the records, especially the ones in France, were destroyed during most of the French Revolution. These estates of the nobility, petty nobility, and officers were, those guys were guillotined, a lot of them. But their collections in their curiosity cabinets, which all the gentlemen of Europe collected these things. Of course, meteors and stuffed alligators and exotic shells and ethnographic material from the New Worlds. There was a new world out there, the Spice Islands, everywhere in the world. So these gentlemen, Scotsmen, Danish kings, the King of Sweden, the King of France, all over Ireland and all over Europe, And a lot of these guys were related, so these collections got passed back and forth. Geez, I haven't even gotten into the actual history, but I'm just telling you how we know what we know. So we study these collections of moccasins. But if it was a German, and he was stationed in a Hessian regiment, that was his post was up on the St. Lawrence River by the Abenakis, those objects that end up in the local historical museum of that town, where that regiment disbanded, where they were originally raised from, you might suspect that they're Abenaki. That's how you do it. And a few other little tricks, too. So that's how we kind of know what we know. Now, Native people are, this is, we can relate this to today. They're here for the fur trade, the Europeans are. They've come for the fur trade, they call it the 3 Fs, fur, fins, and forest. That's the fur for the fur trade with which to make the large felt hats. Because under the microscope, the beaver felt, the wool, not the guard hair, they just throw that away. The wool has a microscopic barb like a rose thorn, and it holds together that fur, and it makes a very strong, compact felt. And that is why they needed the beaver, which they'd hunted to near extinction in Europe. Yet they had this fashion for these large cavalier hats in the early 17th century. So they were in a predicament. They needed these things, but only beaver felt would make a hat that big and hold up. Wool felt and other felts just weren't suitable. And rabbit felt takes mercury. That's why the Mad Hatter is known as mad and crazy, because of the mercury poisoning and toxins in using rabbit fur, which is inferior to beaver and requires mercury, but it does not have the hooks. Looks like a rose thorn, those beaver felt pieces under a microscope. So they also need timber. They're having a mini ice age all over the northern hemisphere, so they have a wood crisis. By the time the pilgrims get here, they are in crisis mode. They don't have fuel. They don't have further fuel to make charcoal for industry. So they are really in building supplies, but above all, the king's ships. So one thing feeds the other. So now these guys are going all over the Europe looking for more resources to keep their search for more resources available. So they need masts for the trees, from the trees for the ships, for the king's ships. We have jack pines here that are this big around. They don't have anything like that in Europe. Think of even the Doomsday Book. What was it? King John had the Doomsday Book. One of those kings, I think it was John, where every tree and every cow and every pig in England was recorded in this book. That tells you, even at that time, they were starting to take notice of the clear cutting that was all over Europe. Same is true all over Germany and France and all these places. If it wasn't the king's forest or somebody's private estate, us peasants couldn't just wander around just picking up deadwood. Even then, we'd have to pay a fee. So this is Europe, and fishing, partly because of the new religious laws, the restrictions of eating meat, like on Fridays and that kind of thing. But also there is actual food crises all over Europe because of the climate changes that were drastic. I mean, the River Seine in Paris and the River Thames were freezing solid. They were having massive crop failures right up until the I think 1709 was one of the worst ever that they could ever humanly remember in Europe. So this is where they're coming from. So now they're here. The Europeans have arrived, and the native people they're hunters. There's no such thing as south of here, perhaps, but north of here, there's no such thing as an Indian vegetarian. It's just not going to happen. It's a short growing season where I'm in Maine. My wife's people, the Penobscot. There's no growing season originally. They can't even document corn growing before pre-contact east and north of the Kennebec River. By the 1690s, it's there. There's cornfields, but each Indian nation owns the whole. They need that amount of resources just to feed themselves. So they own from the mountains to the ocean. Each river, say in Maine, and the Merrimack and so on, it's ocean to mountains, ocean to mountains. You need the entire range of that resource of that river. That's your watershed, and you can go up there and go up every branch and every creek. You go over that hill and you get into another watershed, you're in somebody else's territory. You don't need a fence or a sign, you just kind of knew where it was. You need drinking spring water. That's what you need. You don't always drink out of those rivers. Everybody, I don't know anybody that got giardia from beaver feces? That will just destroy your intestines forever. And the person will slowly starve because the food will not be caught by the cilia in the stomach wall. It just passes through. So giardia is a really deadly disease, and they really were concerned. So you just don't drink out of a swamp. You can't. They knew that. Animals can't. So where you live is important, and it usually is by a water source, because we're canoe people. All over the East Coast, we're canoe people. Whether it's well, this area is dugout canoes. Maybe some elm bark and some other things. They're temporary. But in the north, it's birch bark. So you can travel that entire river system, and portage carry, Winnigan in India, to carry it, the canoe, around the waterfall or the rapids and keep going. And some of those rivers might have dozens depends on what season, dozens of portages. Well, the French knew this too, and they found that out rather, and utilized these same routes. These are the old 128s and the old 495s and the 95s. This was it. So now Europeans have arrived. The native people you have abundant food here in Massachusetts. If it wasn't for the plagues that happened 2 years before the Plymouth people arrived, what became the Plymouth people at Patuxent, was it Patuxent, that there was an empty field that was clear and devoid of original growth trees because the native people had a village there. Native people, you don't just go waltzing in there and you got a stone axe, okay? Even a room this size, how are you going to clear 25 original growth trees with a stone axe? Think about it. Even a forged steel axe, which is brought in by the trade, could break. That weld could break. And you really had a concern whether that thing was going to break on this thing. Was it worth your time? James Adair was a trader later, and he said any Indian could restock his gun as well as a European gunsmith. But it just takes our red artist well over a month because he is a great enemy of sweat. We got better things to do. We got way more important things to do than sit there and hack down a tree. So those trees could be hacked down again and again. You know, we pick away at it. Eventually, over time, there is a clearing. We have crops, and then an epidemic comes in. And when the Pilgrims arrived there, it was already cleared, and all they had to do was burn the bones and the broken down lodges and just burn everything. Already instant village. Because look at New England. You stop mowing your lawn, what's going to happen in 10 years? You're going to have weeds this high and more deer than you have now, and then it's just going to turn in. It's going to go into the secondary growth and then all the way into primary growth eventually. The native people would just burn all that stuff up every year, and it would drive the Pilgrims crazy because all that undergrowth. Once you start doing that, you got to keep doing that. The trees are fine; they're high. You know, the canopy is very high. So here's the native people. They got to hunt. They can go fowling, when they overfly in the spring and the fall. They can go fishing, clamming, and get some furs. They said of the Bushmen of the Kalahari, they only work like 6 hours a day, max. They way more rather spend time singing, teasing their kids, courting, carving, just hanging out, joking around, having fun, enjoying life. You really don't need to spend that much energy on your lifestyle. But in the north, it just is relentless. There's a A person can die, even in Massachusetts, if you're neglectful about your food gathering. So you really, you need to go where the food is in season, where the fish are running in the spring. You need to be standing on that rock with those fish spears or those nets. You have to be there at that time. You miss that week, you might miss it all. You got to put in your stock for the winter, well, for traveling. But the winter things are dried as well. So whatever season you're coming up on, you travel to that spot. Now here, you live in a small village, and it might be a semi-permanent village, but each one of us, our family, would go out to a hunting camp and return, and go back out again, and return. We're in this area, you guys, you're surrounded. We're surrounded by other Indian nations, close by. They have their territories, and it's all based on the water systems or the bays. So you go too far, you're going to be in somebody else's backyard, and they don't like it, taking their deer or their beaver by the time the fur trade comes. So now we're getting penned in a little. The Europeans are building little settlements all over the place. Native people are getting penned in. So when the shooting starts at King Philip's War, where did the native people, out of all the trade goods, look at all this stuff. I mean, nice brass kettle. Find them in your antique shops. If they have an ear like that, I'll give you $200 for it right now. See that folded sheet metal ear? That's very, very French. But the Pilgrims apparently were trading them too. What value is this over a clay pot? So if I drop this, but that beautiful clay pot, I better not break that one. But if I do, I'm pretty much a herd unit. We have no way to cook, or not efficiently. And they're beautiful, and our women would make them and so on. So we immediately started to see the value of the trade goods. Knives, steel knives, with a little touch mark on the blade and all that. They're just European table knives at first. Later on, they become butcher knives. How about the gun? I would say between, and this is from studying. Oh yes, one of the other things of the theory of the theory and the system of learning this stuff is you read trade lists, endless trade lists, inventory lists of the traders or military gifts. Textiles is well over half of all trade goods. Textiles, over half on every single list that I've ever seen, and they've crunched some numbers. Montreal Merchants Records are thousands of pages of inventories of trade goods. Beads, mirrors, everything from colored feathers to ready-made garments. But textiles, in one way or another, whether it's a shirt, like a fancy English shirt I'm wearing here, or a red or blue wool for the leggings and the skirts and the light blankets called match coats. Textiles is number one, but I'll tell you what the most important is. It's this. Once this arrived, there's no going back to the Stone Age. And everything depended on this at that point, because your enemies are, well, we have many, they're armed to the teeth with the latest state-of-the-art. This is your M16. This is about 1680, 85 right here. It's a French gun. What does Roger Williams and Governor Bradford of Plymouth both say about their natives? That they're armed with French guns, even at that time. So I'm just saying that in England, for the English colonies, it's a bozo no-no for selling arms to the natives. That was a big faux pas. That was zero tolerance. However, they would occasionally sell them shot and powder. But they knew if there was a breach in the peace, that these very arms would be used against the colony, and they knew it. They were right. Guess what? So, but the critical key to it all, even though this ends up being the most important thing that's come here, you can do without just about everything else, but once this arrives, The thing that I need, besides a few occasional repairs of the springs, which are technical, machinists, gunsmith or a locksmith, and lead stores. It's what was in these horns, cow horns. Now, we don't have cows, you say. Well, the Europeans brought these too. So, but the gunpowder itself is the key to it all, as far as immediacy. So if you shut our nation off of gunpowder, it's the same as our gasoline today. If you shut off our gasoline today, we all know what happens. We're just not ready to go jump back into the 1890s with horse and buggies. We're not ready overnight. But if you took these away from these guys, we have auxiliary weapons because our boys, of course, are taught to use a bow and arrow, and that is used in the warfare. So when there is a problem, they just immediately cut them off of gunpowder. But everything that one can capture in a war is helpful, is it not? So anything captured feeds, perpetuates that war a little longer. One of the things that King Philip had a problem, he had 2 Achilles tendons from what I can tell. Well, 3 if you want to count as food. The villages were really close to the European settlements, the English settlements, so they're vulnerable. Women and children. We could have men gallivanting all over the Wachusett Valley and running all up and down the coast, hiding in the bushes. But our women and children, we had to hide them out in the swamp. And you know the English, they figured out pretty quick it takes an Indian to hunt another Indian. And so they had guides. And this was our Achilles tendon right there, that and the gunpowder. So between those two things, which also is food as well from your village and your home food sources. So we're refugees. It doesn't take a genius to realize that Philip was running out of steam in King Philip's War. Not just Philip, all of them. If you wanted to continue hostilities, they just couldn't sustain it. It was an unsustainable war. They had no fur trade. English down here, the fur trade is all the beavers have long been hunted out. So even if there was a good fur trade left, that wasn't going to happen. It was a dwindling series of events anyway. So when other things erupted, there's always pigs getting into the Indian cornfields, and you go to the magistrates and they're like, "Get out of here, kid! Don't bother me." That's what you get. Even later in Boston, when the Stockbridge Mohicans, who were French and Indian War veterans, applied to the governor in Boston, they're out in the Berkshires, but the squatters, English squatters, all around there in amongst their settlements. They couldn't get rid of them. So they couldn't even get their day in court. You need to be a white landowning male to have your day in court. So guess where the Stockbridge Mohicans are now? Wisconsin with a casino. Maybe they're better off. I don't know. So here, this is really what the Indian world is about. You want normal economy, normal commerce in the fur trade, or masting, or fishing, or whatever it is that you either allow them or sell them the land, or allow their use of it, or you out and out sell to them, and or you're involved in it. So as these veterans, these native veterans, are coming back from any of these wars, because they, Benjamin Church and the colony of Massachusetts, Massachusetts Bay Colony, had native levies in all those wars, all of them. Any war they fought, the French or the Indians, even through the American Revolution, there was Indian allies that were raised in the local villages, in the communities, the native communities that are still here today. Right nearby here, Natick was a praying town. John Elliott set up a satellite. Let's see if I'm doing this right. I've got to be a weatherman to do it backwards. Yeah, a satellite around Boston, basically, of a number of praying Indian towns. And I don't know how purposefully they did that, but it served theoretically to buffer the settlements against the native raids from who were away and living out in the hills as refugees. The Europeans, like Mary Rawlinson was captured. We actually filmed that over here, George, right at the Peak House. They captured Mary Rawlinson. She was in Lancaster in King Philip's War. When she and her son were taken along with this, what was it, 1,000 person or more refugee camp that kept moving. How many removes did she say later in her diary? My first remove was to such and such place. Then the second remove. They had to keep moving. And they were attacked at Turner's Falls up on Route 2, way up there in what is that town? Turner's Falls. And the whole village was attacked by a disorganized English horse troop. And of course, the natives were using horses at this time, but not completely. And what happened was later, her son was taken away from her very early in that captivity, and he was taken towards Albany with King Philip himself and a whole party to try and get arms from the Dutch or from the Mohawks. The Mohawks ambushed them, and they came back with their tail between the legs. So he didn't go all the way to Canada. There were others had just fled to Canada altogether. Some later drifted back. Maybe that's where they found the Jesuit rings and the Biscay axes that they found in Burrs Hill down in Rhode Island in the Wampanoag burials at Burr Hill. Nobody knows. Could have been a French ship off of Block Island, just had handing out stuff too, or trading with them directly. Nobody knows. But when she finally saw her son again, Mary Rawlinson said to him, "Son, it's not that, oh gee, you almost became a native. Ooh, it's not that you were almost killed by the Mohawks. It's, what she said was, I am glad that you did not become a Catholic." With the French. This wasn't even a Catholic war at this point, and that foretells ominously the future of the next series of colonial wars here. There were 4 French and Indian wars. King William's War was brutal. Cotton Mather called it I can't even pronounce it, deplorable 10 years, Decennium Letium, or something. It's a Latin thing. I just can't. Latin just goes off my head. Boom. And then part 2, as they say, 1698, peace broke out. And then just, what, four years later, they're right back to it again with another global war. These were global wars. Call them the War of the League of Augsburg, the War of the Spanish Succession, the War of Jenkins' Ear, and the 7 Years' War, which finally wrapped up and made the French surrender Canada completely. And then we're into part 2, where the British are in control. Now we know Great Britain. We know what they're like. We know how they operate. But they had their own problems. So by the time the Revolution came, where are we going to get our gunpowder? George Washington wants us and his little cronies. Hancock, he's a smuggler. All those guys down in Virginia and in Pennsylvania, they're land speculators. George Washington was a surveyor. That's who they were. They were going for royal patents to overthrow the king's treaties. So on the eve of the Revolution, there were 2 major, for the Illinois, the Ohio, and the Indiana companies. There was a major push between 2 American and English power brokers, land speculation corporations, to get a patent, to get a royal patent on the eve of the Revolution if Lord so-and-so was more favorable to the Americans. So they were trying to get him before he kicked the bucket. So, but war broke out. Well, that helps. That helps those guys, because if they can overthrow the king, they can get rid of all those treaties and start from zero, which is what exactly happened. But why would we get involved in that? George Washington is not a hat maker. He's not interested in the fur trade. He's really not interested in anything we do except our land, right? Am I not right? So what happens is, we know he also will not be issued. Where's he going to get his gunpowder? I know what goes on. Whenever there's a shortage of gunpowder, we lose, or we get walked on, or we're vulnerable, and we have to sue for peace. That is how you do it. It's just like it is overseas today. You know, you don't have arms. You're gonna be in trouble. So you might have to have the. I don't even know how this all works. You might have to have the Israelis buy it so that you can send it. Because if we have our laws that forbid that, then we'll just get around it. We'll just have other. Well, that's what the English did. They caught the French openly going right to the Spice Islands, unloading all the munitions on the docks, and the American privateers would come down and take it up unofficially, because war had not been declared by France. We know all this. We know what it takes. So why are we going to get on George Washington and the settlers, all the Daniel Boones? Those are the very people that are our problem. It's not the kings. It's those guys. Plus, they're not going to get armed. And on the Western Indian nations of the Great Lakes and Canada, they're not involved in this George Washington thing at all. They're like, are you kidding me? The most powerful force on the planet just beat the King of France in a global war. I would say I've been to Versailles. I've seen that. And someone else would say, well, I've been to Windsor Palace. I've seen Bristol Harbor, and I've seen that. We can't beat that. And so, to come back to the council meetings, and right on the eve of the Revolution, the Stockbridge Mohicans are writing to the Mohawks. Weeks before, I think I have a letter in this book here you can look at. And they say, uncles, what is it? That's a kinship term. Or he says brothers, that's equal. But uncle could be up here. What do you suggest that we do? We know war is coming. And this is like just weeks before Lexington and Concord. And they said, stay home on your mats and let them fight it out. Of course, Stockbridge didn't. They got involved, and so did the Mohawks. Part two of this thing is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because not only have the restrictions of arms, which dictates everything. The fur trade's completely at a standstill, at a trickle during the war times. There's no trade. You can't just go anywhere. It's dangerous out there. Like those hikers got caught in the Pakistani mountains hiking. What are they thinking? It's a war zone. I mean, really. Well, wandering around the mountains out here, it's a war zone too. There were French patrols. There were native patrols. But all you had to do was come across the wrong person, even if you were friendly. And those people had had a loss. Then it becomes what they call a crying blood in the southeast, and a mourning war in the northeast, in the Iroquois. They call it a mourning war, where that family, with the full authority of the senior women of our clan, that's your family, Bear Clan, Bird Clan, Snipe Clan, Turtle Clan, with that authority of that elder woman of that clan, which is our grandma, we can go to war as a police action. We don't need anybody's say-so. She is the authority. I don't need the chief. She just says go, and we have to go. But it's because we've sustained a loss at the hands of one of the offending nation, and that's our target. But if it's an Englishman that had shot Running Bear, our relative, first farmer I see hay in his field up in Charleston, New Hampshire, toast. And his little kids, too, if I can catch them. Because how many of them is worth one of our family, right? That's how it works. But say one of our guys, one of our boys gets shot yet again, attacking them. So now we come back, we can't even go back in that disgrace. We have to bring back. So what you do is you bring back, I don't think I packed it. What happens if the enemy is shot and you take his scalp? Scalping is an ancient and honorable custom. It's the last resort. We really want a prisoner because the grandmother wants, there's three things that are going to happen, potentially. He's either going to get adopted to replace the family member. There's a lot of accounts of New Englanders being taken up into the Indian nations, up to Canada. Some of them, like, what is it, 30%, never wanted to go back. How many of you ladies, you know, are the property of your husband, have no vote, you have no standing in the effects of the house. It goes all to the children. So what's in it for you? And you know, so now these native in the Indian nations, the women have all the authority. There's one girl, Esther Wheelwright. She's in Wells, Maine, little fisherman's daughter. I think the father was a militia sergeant. She gets adopted and captured at Wells in 1703, and is taken up to Norridgewock eventually from the Indian family, a prominent native family. The priest buys her. The priest takes her up to the governor himself of Canada, Vaudreuil, and he says, and she's living in the palace with the governor and his daughter. They attend school at the Ursuline convent, because all good, you know, proper French girls, well, that's where they go, to the convent to be taught. She decides she's living in a palace now. She's to be a fisherman's daughter to a Puritan New England family. Now she decides to become a nun. She chucks all of it, becomes a nun, eventually becomes Mother Superior of all the Ursulines in Canada. And right when Wolfe is invading, coming up the St. Lawrence with the British fleet, she's in there hiding the cathedral silver with all the other nuns. Bad Englishmen. That was her own heritage. They used to send their family members up there every so many years, and as they always did, try and buy them back. She's like, I don't want to go. I'm all set. I married Jesus, see? You know, it's a graven image. But why does the grandmother, besides just being mad, why does she want that enemy, that death of our relative avenged? These are heavy subjects, and you don't get into this. What's in it, you know, besides just her being satisfied? Because in the native view, traditional native view, that the relative would not go on their journey. They would stay and haunt the family like a banshee at night. And who's the one in the village all the time? The women and the children and the grandmother. So it was imperative, and they said, many of the authors describe things about that. If there was a death over here in a wigwam, they would burn it. They would not inhabit it again. They would move far away, a mile away from that place. Imagine coming back to Plymouth Plantation, even if the Pilgrims didn't land. They didn't bury all those bones. There was like, what, over 95% mortality rate from that pathogen that went up their coast in 1617. 95%, this whole area. Imagine what's left. How much of the language, how many of the ceremonies, how much of the healings, traditions. It'd be like out of 1,000 people, you got, what, 2 little kids that can't speak properly, a couple of teenagers that don't want to speak properly, an elder that no one's listening to, and some, maybe one young man and one young woman. I mean, that's all that's left of your village. It's unthinkable. So they really took a hit in this area. So what's left by King Philip's War, what is it, 1675, was it 40 years later or so? Their ceremony, it still can be pieced together in the writings, which is a great thing. So we use these writings to say, oh, look, they do get together in the summer in longhouses with 400, 500, 800 people together. They do have those annual ceremonies. They have football down on the beach. Do they have lacrosse? It's not mentioned. Everyone else does, but so I assume that they must have had it here at one point. So these are the kind of things that we're missing, and some things that kind of suggest that it's there. So with this in mind of the retaliation in your family and our families and the wailing at night by the spirit of our ancestor, you know, is another reason you don't call his name. Running Bear. Let's talk about Running Bear. He was a good guy. Don't call his name. You're going to distract him. he's going that way to where he needs to go. And we keep calling his name, like, huh? What? Did someone call me? Or if he himself is mad, avenge me, avenge me. So he needs to be avenged, as we would do in life. A little kid with a rock throwing incident, says James Adair, in the 1750s, would wait 10 years to inflict the same rock injury on the other little kid. He would take that long. If he had to, he would wait that long to... They will never, what is it? They never will forget a good gesture, but they definitely will never forget an insult, let alone a murder. We're it. We are 911. We are the police department. There is no other authority. It's the original law. And if James Adair is right, he says of all the customs, all of them, the only one that doesn't change is the warfare. Until they stop living in that traditional way, the warfare is the spookiest thing going. Everybody's life is on the line. Everything had to be just so. All the movements, all the behaviors, all the certain foods, certain taboos, the restrictions of behavior and movement, like all had to be adhered to. And if anything happened, you know, they would say, well, that was because so-and-so drank water by day, or they sat in the shadow of something, or they actually leaned against a tree, where what? Animals urinate and big boulder features. You don't lean against that. See some Dutchman leaning up against one of those with a pipe, and the Indians are going crazy. You know, might have all gone back to, you know, you get the scent of those animals. So when you go hunting, you get detected by that animal and your hunting is bad. Who knows? All we know is that they just believed it to be a pollution. All kinds of pollution. If you ate, and this goes for the stickball or the lacrosse games, anything, any endeavor that was of value or of merit, you had to really restrict your behavior. Couldn't hang out with my wife for 7 days, or at least 3 days before I left on my little trip. Another man, even in the war camp, first 3 times to war, you're still a new guy. You have to be painted black, and you're doing all the duties. The number 2 guy, the Skabewe, so the Hitisu in the south, he's the one that doles out the food, because that cornmeal expands greatly and will cause cramps. And the young guys, they're hungry, so they'll eat this stuff. But the old timers knew this, that, kid, that's what's going to cause you cramps like you couldn't believe. On an empty stomach, you start eating that stuff. You're going to bloat and you're going to keel right over with intestinal problems. So they really doled this stuff out. But these guys were Spartans. They were trained from birth, mentally and physically, to go through with these things. So for them to want to avenge that murder of that relative, they said, James Adair, again, the guy lived with him for 40 years. Of anybody, it's the most incredible book. Gets inside their mind like no one else. Priest, the Jesuit Relations of 73 volumes, is always trying to justify the Catholic missions over here in North America. Very interesting books. So in amongst them telling you that they're devil worshippers and everything else, they do tell you certain things. But in the James Adair, well, he's still trying to tell you that it's the lost tribes of Israel that settled North America. But in between all that, he says that these guys will go on their wolfish campaigns. This is 1 or 2 of them. They will go 800 miles for my brother. That was my brother, you people, you know. And all the dances, you know, you go to a powwow and all these guys, nice couple just got married, they dance by. And all these nitwits stand up on the side of I'll call them that because, you know, like, ha! You think that's a salute? Isn't that like the Black Panther movement? Or when you turn to your enemy's country as an entire community, we all face the enemy's country. We go rah, 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 you know, towards making those gestures towards the enemy's country. That starts getting into the Indian thinking. That's what's kind of going on here. So when these guys would get killed, their relatives would want yet more revenge. It's full, that's what moves the Indian world. It's not economics. But once the shooting starts, if somebody gets shot, this can really escalate really quick. And that's why in Afghanistan and the Middle East, fighting a tribal war, there was a formula to get out of that cycle. Blood has to be spilled. Usually, 99% of the time. There was, you have to give them some time. Oh yeah, you have an embargo on them, so first of all, we're not going to be selling them the very things. That's immediate. You got an embargo on them if you're a European power. And this is in the European policies over and over again. And then the other one is a show of force. So there was a guy called, he was a Creek man. See, we have the same thing here. This is what I'm saying. I have a whole file of New England native war tactics. And what it is culture at the very worst of human times. So it's actually a functional Indian culture even though they're at war. So if a chief got killed, they're like, okay, we're out of here. Even if they're just starting out on the journey, that kind of an omen would be enough to just put everybody off. Okay, this isn't going to work. Okay, I get it. Grandfather, we're going to go home. A certain bird landed in the war camp over your head, or lightning struck the tree, and a tree blocked the path or something right in front of you. That's something that gets noticed in the Indian world. But down south, there was a guy called Acorn Whistler, and Acorn Whistler had murdered an Englishman down in the Carolina settlements. Well, you go into the Indian country, the Indian people couldn't retaliate on an Englishman because that would be called murder in the English eyes. So, but in the settlements, the militias and the magistrates are supposed to take care of that. So here they are, they get no satisfaction most of the time. There was a good event up in New Hampshire where they actually, these two guys shot a little kid in a canoe in Portsmouth off of Newington Point and off Fox Point. And they did arrest them, but their buddies got them out of jail and they never pursued it. But to their credit, New Hampshire did kind of go through the motions. Well, Acorn Whistler kills a man and runs back up to way up into the Creek country, Alabama. They couldn't get him, and they tried, they sent messengers up there. Hey, you better turn this guy in. We're going to shut you off of supplies and trade. And this is going to be trouble. Finally, they sent a horse troop up there. Acorn Whistler's hiding. He's hiding in one of the buildings. He's looking out. He's not going out there. He knows they're going to arrest him and hang him. He knows it. It's a fact. So the militia's like, okay, we're going to burn this place to the ground, and we're gonna do our worst here. Where is it? It just, where it's getting to critical mass. And you're reading these documents, you're going, this is better than a novel. What's going to happen next? There's going to be all-out frontier war in about 3 minutes. His old grandfather said, kid, come here. Give me that knife. Took his knife. He goes, look, I love you. You're a knothead. This is all your fault, but I'm going to get you out of this. So they said they need blood. In the Indian mind, he needs blood that has to be spilled. So he took that knife and jammed himself into the wall and killed himself. And they dragged the old man out there, and they said, this is one of Acorn Whistler's relatives. Is that good enough for you guys? Of course, the English guys are going, geez, I don't know. There's an awful lot of them. We're awful far from Charleston, South Carolina. I think we're really outnumbered here. They were sweating it out. And when they saw that, they're like, yep, we're all set. Okay, chief, don't do it again. It was frontier justice, and it was just enough. But you see, it had to be, blood had to be spilled. And you see that here in New England, in the New England wars. Our boys going up to Lake George had a problem. They go up there, and they are seen, especially the earlier back you go in time, this way, yeah. say we went up to Lake George, Lake Champlain, with the English, one of our Indian guys from the community shot a Mohawk. That's a can of worms you don't want to open. The Mohawks. You say the word Mohawk on the St. John River, John Giles said to his captured, his captive father who captured him, he's like, I think it was Mohawks. They made him go fetch water. It's up in the St. John River at Medoctic, in Maliseet. And he made him walk 3/4 of a mile to get a kettle of water. He sees a swamp, and it's at dusk, and there's some stumps down there. And he runs back and he says, yeah, I think it was Mohawks. The old man's like, what? He's like, yeah, Mohawks. He's like, no, yeah, come on. Most brave man in their village, he said. This guy wore tattoos, you know, marks of valor. This guy was a Green Beret. They sneak up to the top of this hill, and John Giles, he's like, yeah, look. Like, no, I think they're just stumps, Johnny. Sean, you know, Chon, C-H-O-N, that's how he called it in his diary. They call me Chon. He goes, Chon, no Mohawks. He goes, yeah, Mohawks. Just then, it goes like this. That guy ran so fast to the village, they abandoned the entire village for months. He said he and his brother, who were captured both, he said they laughed for years about that, scaring those guys with just the word Mohawk. Imagine if you actually shot one. They have a plan, and they will. They are like Dick Tracy on super steroids. They will ferret out the murderer, even if they suspect. The whole village could get attacked because of that. Let alone going into with other clans. That's just one clan. You want to make this a national war? So all of them could get involved. All those clans, let alone an international war with other nations. With that, you need, if it's not our family, we have to shake the war belt at them. See this, purple belt. How much value in the purple is worth twice as much as the white beads? Shaking it angrily at them, trying to get their attention. I'm going to put this down here. If you want to help me, you pick it up in the ceremony. In other places, they dance with a dog head that's been singed and his face is peeled back and he's grinning at you, and you have to dance with this gruesome thing. And he stops, and he hands it to you, or approaches you. And if you want to accept that and dance and go in this war party, you dance with it, and then so on to the next person. Well, that's almost unthinkable. An international war? That's just in the Indian world. That is we're so far beyond our little police action that I can hardly fathom such a thing. So when the French had, in the French and Indian War, in the Battle of Fort William Henry at the foot of Lake George, they had over 21 different Indian nations with them. There was one group there, probably Ioways, that they didn't even have an interpreter for. They had come from so far away. They couldn't even really effectively communicate with these guys. But that just goes to show you how odd that was, that one occasion. Around here, everybody knew everybody. And that's another thing about these Indian wars, everybody knew everybody. So if you saw somebody in the battle, and then you saw him later, you're like, he was there, I saw him. He burned that Peak House. That's the guy. Well, they knew Sagamore John and One-Eye John and Sagamore Sam. They were at this attack here, and they left a note on that rail, on that fence rail. Remember, it says something like, you know, we have nothing to lose but our lives, but you people will lose your houses. This is really where he's hitting them. He's really digging in. Somebody knew they could write this now. So some Indian had been taught English, so he wrote this note. It's actually very good. It's probably better English than half the farmers spoke. It just goes to show you how personal the Indian wars were. Once it's personal, and they know who everybody is, it's hard to get out of it. So when they all show up to sign the treaty up in Dover, Waldron, in a sham battle, the Indians shoot first. It's actually just, you know, it's a common occurrence. It's a volley but you shoot in the air. live rounds over the heads of the enemy or your opponents. And Indians shot first, and the militia got the drop on 400 natives came in. 200 of them already signed a treaty, and they had to let them go because they were actually local praying natives. But there was 200 of them they sold as slaves to the not the Azores, to the Spice Islands. And then he hung or executed about a dozen more on the spot or in Boston, I can't remember. The first action of that war, it went right to Waldron's house. Tells you, and that was a whole other thing. But it's personal. It's a personal war. They're not going for the glory of the king, not going for the glory of the flag, none of that stuff. But if the enemy makes it personal, then it becomes personal. And it's true for humans all around the world. You know, everything was fine until they bombed Pearl Harbor. Whether it was, whether they goaded them into it or not. 9/11, you know, we all woke up and said, okay, some people were madder than others. And if it happens again, you know, all bets would be off. So people, they pick their time. They're not stupid. Because the United States, you know, this is my soapbox, you know, we were called the sleeping giant, the sleeping lion or something, sleeping bear. You know, that's Russia sometimes, but you don't, we're just kind of docile. But if you get us all together, we're gonna be mad. We're gonna do something about it. We just got to get mad enough. But I hope it never happens. But I'm just telling you, we got too much Indian in us as a culture. You know, we're so independent. That's where we got it from. You live in Europe, you're a peasant. You know. So over here, who gets the vote now? The women. Who started that? We got elected Senate and elected representatives. You know, so we have hereditary chiefs and we have elected chiefs. And we meet in Albany, for God's sakes. That's how the Longhouse would come in and meet with the governor of Albany. And it was based on that Franklin started it right there. It just goes on and on. I love this stuff. I really love the topic. 10 ways to Sunday, and especially the French stuff. But I just would just like to thank you all for having me down, and I would like to open up for any few quick questions. I know it's already getting late, and you guys got school tomorrow, and I know my kids do. But if you had any questions, yes, ma'am.
Are there any other websites? Massachusetts, there's one, I think it is Walker, the fellow, and he abstracted a lot of things out of the mass records, so you can go through 1626, you know, so-and-so sold ammunition to the Indians, and da-da-da-da-da, you know, 1627, kind of chronological. Is it Wolf Tracker or Wolf Walker, something like that?
Now you got me interested. My buddy works about 2 miles from the Mass Archives, and apparently he can get stuff online. And we did a King Philip's War thing last year, and there were right at near Brookfield, Quabog Plantation, Wheeler's Surprise. Captain Wheeler and his bunch were ambushed, so-called. And just about the same time, there were 4 Frenchmen who had just been released out of Boston, were coming through within a day of that very same attack. And when we did this reenactment, I had one of my buddies who does a French soldier from the time period, and he goes, well, I can't justify myself at a King Philip's War event. And I said, yes, we can. And I downloaded the actual letter from Frontenac himself, from the governor of Canada, giving permission to Monsieur Normanville to travel from Boston to Hadley unmolested. And it's in English. So we photocopied it. It's online. He got it online. It's in color, photocopied it on parchment paper, and then we folded it up and put it in his pocket. I said, Garrett, if anybody asks you to see your papers, he would whip this thing out. It was an exact copy of the original. And I mean, it just, I kept asking people to ask him for the papers, ask him. But, you know, that is a treasure trove, and people really are just starting to really get into that writing and see how that, to get it transcribed into quick typed English is really would be beneficial. But there is nothing like seeing the original documents. You see their little doodles in the margins, the guy's face with the tattoo marks. This is the guy that owes me 4 otters. And you put them in the margin, and they draw the otters. So when he comes in, and he's not there, but the clerk is, he goes, oh yeah, that's that guy. I can see, that's your tattoo. So he scratches the otters on, right on the margin, doodling. It's got to be a psychological, just an amazing thing to see the handwriting analysis and everything about it. It's I don't know that guy, but I'm gonna see if the rest of them.
It's abstracted. This is chronological things, all these events. You just scan through.
They're misplaced. There's Indian files, but there's Indian information in other files. So it will take a lifetime to go through there, and that's what I really would like to spend some time in there. See treaties. Yes, sir.
I'm interested in learning more about the day-to-day life of the Northeast Indians, but it's very difficult finding any research information. Can you make any recommendations?
Check out my forthcoming book. What this book here on the front is just photographs and copies of letters and descriptions. So when they describe them at a certain month, gathering seagulls' eggs, or they find fragments of mat weaving in the burials, still intact, because they just happen to be in contact with a brass kettle, and they're all facing a certain direction, and they're all the heads, the burials, and that they can still excavate the villages, and they find pieces of. They cut these kettles up and they make ornaments. So what archaeologists call that, a lot of it nonlinear thinking, where you find an object, like a portion of a gun lock that was broken. They just sharpened it and made a scraper out of it. Or one guy let them very early on. They saw the women out there weeding the corn with bone shoulder blades. I don't know if they were deer or whatever they were. He says, here, you ladies shouldn't use those. Use these steel or iron hose, metak. And so they go back to Europe. He comes back on another voyage, and they're all wearing them around their necks. He's like, well, I gave you these for weeding. He's like, oh, no, we use it for magic. We conjure our enemies 300 miles away with this metal. So it's between the archaeology and the descriptions from the people who were eyewitnesses, as biased as half of them, and all of them certainly are, all of them. I guess we could say that. All of them were biased to whatever. We read their things, and if they all 20 of them describe yellow moccasins, then we got to think that they were wearing yellow moccasins. Even though one guy's crazy, one guy's a soldier, a professional killer, like John Standish and Miles Standish and John Smith. All these guys were professional soldiers. But yet they describe certain cultural things. And we know what the foods were, and you got to figure the food was seasonal. We can, if you go and try this stuff out, try brain tanning a deer skin, making that leather soft and smoking it, and then making it into clothes. So we know each one of these garments, a pair of moccasins, and each legging is a deer skin itself. It's 3 different deers. And as a hunter, we would know that. We would know, I remember that deer. Oh yeah, that one too. He ran to the left. The other one ran to the right. The other one, I shot him the first time, and he got him. Women generally used doe skin, and the men wore buckskin. Start thinking about the reality of it, and then take it up into the mountains. Take all the stuff, put it on, make all the stuff you need, and then take it up and do a little trek, as they call it, and see what works and what doesn't work. If your pouch is way down on your hip, it probably is just banging around. But this is even too low for me. My shot pouch here is a little higher, as is the horn. So this stuff is tight. It's not like a grenadier with a big cartridge box, when the cartridge is falling all over the place. This stuff is tight. I can run Mach 5 with this stuff tucked under my arm. Very, very practical knowledge is what you really want. I could take one more question, and you guys are welcome to come up. A lady, if there is one, that would like to ask a question, that would be proper. Boy, girl, boy, girl. Yes, ma'am.
Can you briefly talk about where they got the
All of Europe was full of gunpowder.
But that's possibly was made here somewhere?
No. In fact, like in France, it's heavily restricted. The gathering of saltpeter and all that was a royal privilege. And if you barred your chicken house from the saltpeter gatherers from scraping all that stuff off the chicken house to make gunpowder, they could kick your door in and confiscate everything you had. So it was really, really restricted. Queen Elizabeth wanted to, like, not Liz today, but back in Elizabethan times, realized after the Spanish Armada came, they realized that very quickly that they can't rely on Dutch gunpowder. They really had to start making it themselves. So Elizabeth gave some Holland guys a royal patent to make it in England. It doesn't go anywhere. It's always better if it's thrown out to the general commercial, what do you call it, for profit, private enterprise. It's always better if they do it, but you still need controls and restrictions. So in Europe, that was one of their privileges that they liked, as was other things supposedly to send over. We send them raw materials, and we are to buy the linen from them. When they started importing illegal cottons from India, everybody wore it, everybody knew it. But we also were starting to have a homespun industry where we were weaving our own linen and our own woolens. And this, all over North America, the French and the English. So that and gunpowder is part of that whole mother country thing. And gunpowder is like number one on the list. They don't talk about it. But until France showed up, the Americans were sweating it out about who was going to supply George Washington. They were really sweating it out. Because it was the reality. They had to go clear up to Ticonderoga to get cannons, and they barely had enough gunpowder to ring Dorchester Heights with cannons that barely had enough, a couple of shots a day, but they were running out. They just made it look like they had a bunch of gunpowder. They really didn't. And if the British had pushed it, they really would have been found out that they were Quaker cannons, as they call it. Well, I really just wanted to touch a little bit on the Indian thinking. It's not the same as European. They're not even the same, other than they got two hands, and I have a beautiful wife at home. She's just crazy as a bat, and I love her. But I know I'm in an Indian household. It is drastically different from the house that I grew up in. Just everything that she does and says, and growing up on the reservation in Old Town, Maine, and that's today. And they weren't killing the animals, when she grew up every single day for a living, and required, gunpowder annually from the government. That was long gone. So I really think that there's a lot to learn from the other perspective, as there is in everything. And it's no more or less. We can all step back, I hope, and just say, well, look, our history clashed at times. We're not like that today. Our policies, when the dust settled, look what they are. They got a reservation. You ever been in a ghetto? It's a ghetto. She lives on an island. It's an island. Well, that's where she was brought up. And it's a whole different world. But it's with people that look like you and talk like you, and most of them, your relatives. So when she had to go out on a hot date, she had to leave the reservation and come find me down in Tennessee. Thank you all very much for having me. I enjoyed it.